Hey Leisure Gamers, welcome back to the 5th episode of the Leisure Gamer Podcast. My name's Luke Bryce, and I'm joined with Alan Edens
Hey, what's up, Leisure Gamers?
and Sunshine Cinerath.
What, the sheep?
So, how you guys been?
Not bad, not bad. Pretty overwhelmed by all the games coming out.
But you're getting gaming in.
Yes, at every opportunity.
So, another thing is the Muppets are coming out this week. Are you guys excited to go see it?
Oh my gosh, that's this week? I have to go see it.
I don't know, I'm going to fit it in.
I can barely fit in gaming right now, let alone going to see the Muppets.
You can't handle the awesomeness
I don't think
of
I
the
can.
Muppets.
Turkey Day movie.
So, let's see. For games that we've played, to give a little preview, what we'll talk about, we'll talk a little Uncharted 3. Both Alan and I were able to finish the game, and the review is posted, so if you're listening to this and haven't watched the review yet, check that out. And then a big focus is Alan's been playing Skyrim. Right, Alan?
Oh, yeah.
And then he also started Assassin's Creed Revelations, which came out last week. And in the meantime of him doing that, I've also gone back to beat Assassin's Creed Brotherhood before I move on to Revelations. And Sunshine, you kind of had a very non-existent week for gaming, but you did play some Magic.
I squeeze in a little Magic the Gathering, but my gaming has just been taken over by other things right now. So not a lot of time for gaming, but plenty of time for podcasting.
Always time for podcasting.
Yeah, always.
So that's the games we've been playing, and we'll probably, by now, as you're listening to the podcast series, you'll notice that we usually do the feature first for about 30 minutes, and then around the 30-minute mark, we'll jump to our games. So if you're more interested in hearing about the games, jump to that, or stay through the feature, or listen to the games, then come back to the feature. Whatever you want to do, we're here for you.
Yeah. Don't forget the community mail at the end.
Oh, yes. Can't forget the community mail.
Yep.
But let's move on to the feature.
All right.
Let's do it.
Sunshine, today's feature is, I should say Sunshine and Alan, today's feature is game fantasy versus fantasy sports. And our real question is, why are fantasy games, like video games, I guess you could say, shunned upon by the outside world, while fantasy sports, like fantasy football, fantasy hockey, fantasy baseball, are socially acceptable and, in fact, so popular? So, Sunshine, this was kind of your theme idea. Do you want to take us through what you were thinking when you thought of it?
And so one of the things I noticed is when I'm at work, all the guys are playing fantasy football and fantasy baseball, and I'm not going to lie, there's a fantasy golf. And
Really?
There's fantasy golf, right? Yes, there's fantasy golf, fantasy NASCAR, there's fantasy everything. And I'm somewhat of a sports fan. I love football, I watch basketball. I actually just got back from a hockey game this weekend. And so I like sports, but, you know, in the office, it's like, yeah, it's okay to talk about fantasy sports and setting your rosters and doing all that and making your trades. But, you know, the second I start bringing up, like, video games and, you know, people are like,
It gets weird.
It gets weird. People are like, oh, yeah, I play Assassin's Creed, and, you know, oh, I do this. I play Magic the Gathering. I do this. And, you know, people are like, oh, okay. You know, and then the first thing is like, oh, do you play, like, World of Warcraft? And, you know, and they kind of do it in, like, a condescending manner. Like, it's, you know, not the cool thing to do. And I'm like, what do you mean? You know, I'm like, this is like $1 billion industry. This is a huge thing. And, you know, just kind of, gamers are still kind of shunned as, you know, you're still not cool anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely feel your plight, Sunshine.
So,
I feel like if I ever meet someone, because video games are a big part of my life, I want to talk about them. But then again, I'm a little bit reserved because it's like, I don't know. Like you said, it's a little not that it's unacceptable, but it's you have to be like careful that you're so open about the video games that you do play.
yeah.
I don't know. It's strange. Alan, what do you come across that at work or?
I mean, the work I do is the nerd level is pretty high, so it's like I'm around like-minded people anyway, so, but I would say, like, there is probably still that stigma against um, like gamers being seen as like less uh, I don't know, less, I guess, socially adept and stuff like that, and
That's true.
and just being a sort of a sort of a fringe sort of hobby.
Which is weird because I would wager that more often than not, uh, pretty much anyone you run into has either one of the consoles, the Xbox, PS3, or Wii, or some sort of console, or they at least have a computer and play games. So it's like people definitely know about video games, but like
Or
it's
have a
just not.
phone and play games.
Yeah, or have like a iPhone or iPad or just a Android. So it's like it's so prevalent, but yet it's like it's still a little bit of a faux pas to talk about it in public.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that I've noticed is like, yeah, everyone plays games, and a lot of guys have Xboxes, and they play various games too. But it's like, the second you kind of mention a little bit more obscure title, that they're suddenly like, oh, you must be one of those hardcore gamers, who lock themselves in, the basement, don't see sunlight for months at a time. There's not that, that gamers have outside lives, and this is just one of my various hobbies, one of these things I like to spend my leisure time with. And they just kind of immediately assume that because I think I mentioned to somebody, like, oh, he asked me, well, I told him, I'm like, oh, yeah, I like to play video games. And he's like, oh, what do you play? And I'm like, oh, I'm really big into Assassin's Creed. And he didn't know what it was. And I'm like, and he's like, oh, is that like kind of like World of Warcraft? And I'm like, well, this big blockbuster title, how do you not know what it is? But, I was just like, he
Mm-hmm.
just didn't seem like that interested. And it was just kind of, it just seemed awkward. So,
Yeah, and it still doesn't have that. It doesn't have the same status as other sort of hobbies have. Like if you're a movie buff, you can tell someone that, and they don't. It doesn't really have too many negative connotations. Like it's
yeah.
not. People don't assume like, oh, you spend all your time just watching movies. You never get out. You never interact. No, it's like a hobby. It's something that they enjoy to do on their own
Yeah.
time, and something they're very knowledgeable about.
Yeah.
So even within video games, there seems like there's a hierarchy. So like maybe everyone has a system or some sort of access to video games, but then there even within video games, there's a certain hierarchy to which ones are acceptable.
Yeah. And I think the people who are willing to label themselves as gamers, when you say gamer, it's like you are putting yourself in a different hierarchy because, everyone is a gamer, though, let's face it. Everyone's playing Angry Birds and, playing different games. And while those may be more casual, that still makes you somewhat of a gamer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, the issue is, people aren't realizing how much they are playing video games and,
Mm-hmm.
where they really fit into the whole gaming community.
Yeah, like Cityville and Farmville are just unbelievably huge.
Oh yeah, exactly. Everyone's always talking about that, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, you guys probably play more hours on the games than I do some weeks.
Yeah, that's true. They're just playing these casual games, but yet we can't play our full retail games or indie games.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if these fantasy sports games, I've never got into them. Well, I'm not a sports guy. Sunshine, you definitely are, but I'm not. But I don't know. Are you doing basically the same thing you are in video games? You're just
I would
I,
say, yeah, I think one of the obviously appeals of fantasy sports is that you get while you're watching the game, you're basically being rewarded, you know, during the game. Like, is my sports team doing well? Kind of thing. So if you're a particular favorite player and you actually have them on your roster is doing really well, then you get that double bonus of, yes, my team is winning and my guy's doing well. Or one of the things that I always just find completely weird about fantasy sports, because as a true fan of my sports teams, I have a hard time rooting for the opposing team. But in fantasy sports, if you happen to have someone on the opposing team who is on your roster and they're doing very well against your team, you're like, yes, yeah, go beat my team. And I'm thinking, how? What? That doesn't make sense. You want your team to win. Why do you want this other team to beat you? But they want their fantasy team to win at the same time. And I just, it's kind of a double entendre in terms of, what do you really want? And, I always hear, like, people who used to say they're true fans are just, like, really more fans of their fantasy sports. And it's it's pretty silly.